Hi, my name is Amie, and I am the audio guy for Coach Me If You Can podcast. Today's podcast was done on a remote call, and there are some slight audio hiccups here and there. Thanks for listening. Our show is about bringing the best practices in education to inspire, connect, and empower all educators by providing practical tips that can be used in the everyday school setting.
Welcome to the Coach Me If You Can podcast. We're so excited to have a special guest here with us today. Not only do I have my colleague, Amie Krummick, who was on our last podcast with us. Welcome, Amie.
Yes. Hi, Rylee. I'm back again.
But we also have Dr. Kristen Brendel. She is a really amazing researcher, professor, licensed clinical social worker, speaker, coach, and a trainer with so many diverse experiences that we've gotten to know this year as she completed a 10-week mindfulness professional learning opportunity with our co-op and then also with many of our districts. So very excited to have her today. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here with you both, Amie and Rylee, and all the listeners. I'm so excited and delighted to be here. Thank you.
This was a hot topic. There was a little bit of arguing and fighting about who was going to be able to do this podcast with you. So we're pretty excited to have you.
Thank you.
Can you give us a little 30-second elevator speech just about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. Thank you for asking. I'm an associate professor of social work at Aurora University, and there my teaching, research, and practice interests all revolve around mindfulness-based interventions, self-care, and resilience, particularly with an interest in helping those who are at risk for secondary traumatic stress. That would include educators, mental health professionals, healthcare professionals, so helping to mediate any effects as well as to help prevent that type of trauma. People don't really understand, or society doesn't really acknowledge those populations as really being much more of being susceptible to secondary traumatic stress. We attribute that more towards our first responders, police, military, but being with students and dealing with their trauma day in and day out in terms of educators and for mental health professionals, working with them closely in a very intimate setting. And then, of course, healthcare providers dealing with almost the immediate aftermath of working with very vulnerable people in very vulnerable positions. That's my particular interest. So whatever we can do to try to help those populations deal with their stress or mediate any stressors ahead of time is really helpful. And it also helps, to prevent burnout within the profession. And it helps to assure more student success in terms of looking at education and client success and patient outcomes.
That was so beautiful.
I think I'm processing all of that. As she was sharing all that. I'm like, wow, that is a lot to carry in your practice and then in your teaching.
And I like how you mentioned, Christy, that if we take care of the caretakers, then we're really taking care of our students at the end of the day. Especially as educators, we have this camaraderie where we're in it together. And a lot of the times we're in it together and a lot of people don't understand. So I'm glad that you're bringing awareness to that there needs to be some outside help sometimes for us to be able to take care of our students. So I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're looking at those protective factors, mental health obviously is one significant piece of that. And mental health care doesn't have to necessarily be formal healthcare, seeing a clinical social worker or other therapists. It can be about those little things that we do to take care of ourselves day to day to help prevent that significant amount of stress. So I like to call that sustainable self-care. So little doses of self-care throughout the day can really help to, again, mediate those stressors and keep us in what Dr. Dan Siegel calls is that window of tolerance. That is like where we're really feeling as though we're in this ideal mode. It's not necessarily rainbows and unicorn and glitter, but it's that point of our stress levels where we're really feeling as though we're able to manage things that are coming our way. And then, of course, when we hit that stress response, which can happen at any time in the middle of teaching class or podcast, even, that becomes much more difficult to manage. So engaging in sustainable self-care can really help, again, to kind of keep us in that window of tolerance or otherwise just known as baseline or homeostasis.
When I heard you just say the rainbow, unicorn, and glitter, Christy, I remember going to one of your sessions, the 10-week session that you've been doing with our staff. And I was thinking, yeah, my life really isn't rainbows and unicorns and glitters. And I was thinking about some of the strategies that you've taught us over those 10 weeks. And I've actually been trying to use one of them. And I don't know what you're going to share with us later, but so I won't spoil it. But I do feel like even some of those little strategies that you shared with us along the way have been so helpful to think about every day and put into your own practice, both at home when things are crazy and at work.
Yeah. And that's the sustainability of that practice, is that they can be implemented anywhere. While we're already living our life, they don't require any extra time necessarily to practice. And those more formal types of practices are wonderful too. But my thing that I like to say is the last thing we want to do is stress out about trying to figure out when to implement stress reduction tips and techniques and those types of exercises. So sustainable self-care can be helpful within the moment. So as we're engaging our students in the classroom, when we're in a meeting, and then of course, when we have some of that fill up time, that time that we can kind of just sit and recharge and just be.
I definitely have been in a position before where I was stressed about how I'm going to get that stress reduction in. One of the biggest takeaways that I got from that 10-week course was it can be informal and really quick, and just a very quick mind shift that you can do to build some of that stress reduction.
Yes. And I think that's why it actually worked as something that I could realistically try on a daily basis, because it wasn't really easy. Admittedly, I mean, I've done that when I've been home and things are crazy, and I'll walk in the other room and just be like, okay, just do that stop practice. I've done it in the car before I've gone into meetings, and I've done it here in the office when I've been here and I just needed a minute. And it really does just take a minute or two. And I feel like that's why it works. And you're right. So many of the other strategies or things maybe we hear about and learn about seem so unrealistic to put into practice, or even thinking bigger, I don't have 20 minutes to sit there and do something. And Christy, the strategies and ideas that you've given us have been really helpful.
I'm so happy to hear that. And I think one of the most important strategies that we can do is just throughout the day, take a look and see how we're doing. Take a dip inward and do a little nervous system check, do a little mind check. How am I doing right now? Where am I at within the window of tolerance? Am I creeping up toward hyper arousal, towards that stress response? Am I kind of sinking down towards withdrawing into hypo arousal? So those are really helpful things, because oftentimes we're so busy and we really don't take time out to understand where we are at. And then we find ourselves reacting to certain stimuli and we're like, where did that come from? Sometimes we know exactly where that came from, but oftentimes it sort of hits us by surprise. So if we're able to take moments just throughout the day, and again, it can be while we're engaging in other activities. Where am I at right now? Where's my mind at? How's my body feeling? How's my body and mind responding to the experiences that are before me? Can be very, very helpful, because when we're able to take that check-in with ourselves, then we're able to respond accordingly. And it really helps to increase that space between stimulus and response.
So what I was hearing you saying there is that those little check-ins could really be a form of that self-compassion throughout the day. We all know that mindfulness, self-compassion, gratitude, there's kind of our hot topics in air quotes right now. In the middle of a pandemic, we're all talking about how can we give grace to ourselves. Can you help explain what really is self-compassion and gratitude?
Yeah, thanks for asking. When we're looking at gratitude, we can start with that. You're really looking at, and again, this can be very much of an informal practice, a sustainable self-care practice, where we're really looking at understanding where goodness is coming from and then amplifying that. So where the goodness is coming from ourselves, where it's coming from with other people or within our environment. So taking note of that and then amplifying that. So for as long a period of time that we might have, is just really recognize that. Recognize these moments that we're encountering. And so that's really helpful. And there are a lot of actually evidence-based practices surrounding gratitude that can help promote psychophysiological health and wellness, which is fantastic. And just a couple of those practices involve really just counting our blessings. So it's literally just like, what are these things that I'm grateful for? And keeping a daily gratitude journal is also really helpful, because that really helps us to be able to see those things throughout our day to be grateful for. And then when we remember to jot them down, we can put them in our notes section on our phone or keep a more formal type of journal. Really helps. And it helps that process of amplifying the good in things. And self-compassion, of course, is related to gratitude. So when we're looking at self-compassion, it's really a compassion practice toward ourselves. So oftentimes it might start with gratitude or it might end with gratitude, where we're really just allowing ourselves a break. We're extending ourselves grace. We're extending compassion to ourselves with the same enthusiasm that we would someone else. So I like to call it the other rule, meaning that we do unto ourselves as we would do unto others. Because I find that the golden rule is amazing. And really the people that I work with and those who I associate with really tend to treat other people way better than they treat themselves. In fact, oftentimes, particularly in education, we're on the bottom of our own list. And the reality is that if we want to show up for our students, we want to show up for our families, our friends, our communities, we can't give what we don't have. So starting with ourselves and starting by extending some of that self-compassion to ourselves can really help. Again, it's a sustainable self-care practice, but it also just helps us to be able to show up for others in a much more rich and engaging way.
Christy, when you were talking, you just gave some strategies, but I think what I was wondering too, well, let's see, you had talked about in terms of practicing gratitude. That was one of the things I wanted to ask you about. How do you really live this life of practicing gratitude daily and regularly and build that into your normal routine and everyday life? And you mentioned journaling, right? To kind of amplify and think more about those good things and kind of switch your brain over into that positive thinking more often. You talked about learning to be more self-compassionate and some of the practice that you're going to share with us and some of the practice that you've talked about. Are there other strategies or things that people can do to really lead a life of practicing gratitude and just to have that deeper understanding of self-compassion on a daily basis?
Yeah. So one idea that educators may like, or maybe they won't, is to keep a class gratitude journal. So where students can all participate in writing something down every day during the school year. Then at the end of the school year, the class can revisit those things that they had noted. And then again, the cool thing about keeping that gratitude journal and involving other people, so this can be done with families. I've done this with my own family for quite a few years, is that you begin to look for things throughout the day to be grateful for, just so you can have something to write down. And so just a means to an end. And then it evolves into this really awesome practice where we're able to acknowledge and see and amplify that gratitude. And then we put it down. And then it becomes something that we can look forward to, because we know at the end of the school year, the end of the calendar year, we can take a look back on all of those experiences. And it's generally a very rich experience for those who engage in that practice.
I love that idea. I just wrote that down and thought, I want to do that with my family. And then to incorporate that into a classroom, what a cool idea, and have kind of empower all of the students to look for those really positive things. They could be big, they could be small, but then to write them in that journal and then reflect on that at the end of the year in terms of all of the good things and positive things that have happened in a class. I love that. That makes me just feel kind of nice and warm and fuzzy just thinking about it, and then paying more attention to those positive things that everybody's doing.
Yes. And that's amplifying the good there, Amie. So
no, it's exactly
practice
right.
has already started.
I just did it.
That gives me sunshine and rainbows. And thinking about the positive relationships that's going to build in the classroom, because the gratitude can be this classmate did something, or my teacher did something, or it's the opportunity for our adults to really praise our students, and then also for our classmates and our students to praise each other is a skill that we have to teach a lot of our students. And so that's a really great way to incorporate that. And what a great coping skill of, in the moment, if I've practiced this with my classroom in the moment, maybe I can find some gratitude and be able to use that strategy.
Right. Like in those real life situations that don't really go our way or don't go our students' way, that they can still reflect on that. And I like it because I think it will also maybe help some of those students that fall under the radar a little bit more with some of the little subtle things they do, like so-and-so dropped a pencil, or they brought my lunch down to me, or whatever it is, that those little things that don't always get noticed by adults or the bigger group would be noticed, and it could be noticed in a gratitude journal.
Another brilliant idea by Dr. Kristen Brendel.
I love it. I think, you know what, Christy, the other thing I was wondering is as we start to roll into summer and people are wrapping up in their classrooms, getting ready to really probably relax and reflect on the year and then just enjoy their summers, what do you think would be some ideas for educators that they could do to refuel and take care of themselves and come back re-energized for the fall?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. That's a really good question. And I think sustainable self-care will be very important throughout the summer. I mean, if educators ever needed a summer break, it's this summer, and that opportunity to be able to rejuvenate and restore before fall, which is typically a very stressful time, no matter what, as we begin the school year with students and whatever the uncertainties are that occur with a normal fall. And then who knows what that's going to look like post pandemic come this fall as well. So some things that I would recommend for educators is to first do what works for you. So those things, those practices that fill you up are really important. And also to be creative. Educators just by nature are very creative professionals. And that also creates novelty, and the brain loves novelty. And we tend to respond to being creative in a really rich way. And that helps to activate our rest, digest, connect, restore system. So it helps to kind of keep us within that window of tolerance. Also, again, just practicing those frequent check-ins throughout the summer. How am I doing? Where am I at right now? And perhaps what's one thing that I can do? What's one step that I can make toward or closer to that window of tolerance? Or what is one thing I can do to maintain this window of tolerance? And these practices are really effective when we get the handle on them, when we're not stressed. So when we're practicing them, when we're in that, again, that connected state of mind, when it's time for game time, then it really helps us to be able to go back to those practices and really helps to strengthen resilience during those times, because we already have practiced them. We already know what the impact is. And it's not as far reaching to get there as it would be if it was something that you're practicing while you're stressed, or something that is a brand new practice. So again, whatever works for educators, I would encourage more of that over the summer. And also things like just connecting back to nature, getting out into the forest if that is a preference, because it's a really nice and natural way to be able to get what's called moments of awe. And again, those are moments that fill us up. They connect us to ourselves. They connect us with nature. And then we begin to feel that impact. We begin to feel that the way that our body and mind is responding to those stimuli. Usually we feel a bit euphoric and more kind of excited. And we're able to then bring that state of mind back home with us. So it's very sustainable.
Those are all really great strategies. I love the getting back to creativity, doing those check-ins. Practicing when not stressed, that made me think about what we work with our teams on. When a lot of the work that we do with students is around how to get them to self-regulate, because a lot of them are just at that co-regulation stage. So we're offering a lot of support. But how do we work on that at a time when it's not in the middle of a crisis and they're not upset and feeling angry or sad or whatever they're experiencing? So thinking about that in our own practices, how do we take that walk and just think, okay, how can I start to practice some of these things when I'm not stressed, when I'm feeling calm, so then I could use those strategies when I really need to. And then getting back to nature, I love that one. Everyone just wants to be outside anyways, go on walks, go to the forest preserve, go to parks, just enjoy nature. So thank you. Those are all great strategies.
So Christy, I wasn't going to go through this whole thing without asking you about forest bathing. So when you brought this up in our Stress to Resilience Mindfulness series, you mentioned forest bathing. And of course, my brain goes to, I know what a forest is. I know what bathing is separately. Are we showering in the forest? Christy Brendel, tell me about that.
Yeah, so not literally. We are not taking a bath in the forest. Although, if that's what you're into, that's okay. But forest
get you
bathing
closer
really
to nature, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Immersing yourself. So metaphorically bathing in the forest and with all 5 of your senses, so engaging each sense in the forest. And it's very easy to do because the forest, has so much to offer. And this is American forest bathing. It really comes from Japan. Like the formal practice comes from Japan, called Shinrin Yoku. And they began to develop forest bathing as a practice to help reduce stress because there was a lot of suicides related to work stress that was occurring in Japan, particularly in the 80s. And so the Japanese government had learned and had known really just from ancient practices how being connected to nature helps to reduce stress. And so since then, certainly we've been hiking for a very long time, but forest bathing differs from hiking just in a sense that we're not really looking for a means to an end of getting from point A to point B. We're really looking at immersing ourselves within the 5 senses mindfully as we're moving through nature. So, and the great thing too about forest bathing here, at least in Northern Illinois, is there are forests everywhere and it's free. And that's the thing also when we're looking at sustainability is all of these practices that we're talking about are readily accessible to us. They don't cost any money. Really, the most difficult thing is remembering to practice. So that is something that can be the most difficult challenge to overcome. And then for that, we've got technology. So set your smartphone, set your smartwatch. I always recommend wearing a bracelet, and it doesn't have to say forest bathing on it or, remember, but it can just be a bracelet that has an intention attached to it. And that can be really helpful because that serves as another reminder to whatever it is that we need in that particular moment of that particular day.
A visual prompt, if you will. We love prompts around here. So before I ask you to lead us through one of your mindfulness activities, we were both just curious. So we were reading your bio on your website, which you're going to share with us a little bit later. And this field is just so interesting and something that we don't talk about a whole lot, the secondary traumatic response and basically just working with mindfulness and educators. Can you tell us a little bit about how you landed into this area? What brought you here on this podcast today doing the work that you do?
Very organically is sort of how I landed here, which I think really is how we landed in our professions in general. But it started out actually as a college student, and I took a course on Eastern religions. And I started to learn about Buddhism and Buddhist psychology and how closely those philosophies were related to scientific principles in terms of stress reduction and strengthening resilience. And it really was very intriguing to me. And then when I was a master's level student, I read a book about social work practice and meditation. So this is before really mindfulness as a term was popularized or was, part of our everyday language, way before it appeared on the cover of Time magazine. Then I started to practice meditation, and I thought I was the world's worst meditator because I couldn't clear my mind. There was no space between thoughts or emotions. I wasn't levitating. But somehow when I was finished with my meditation practice, really without any instruction other than just having read some books, I felt better. And I really didn't know why I felt better. So I maintained that practice. Once I was in my PhD program at Loyola, I had revisited this again on a more academic sense. I wrote an article on social work practice and meditation, and then began to look at that again in a much more academic sense, in a more research-based way. And then I had finished my program at Loyola, and I had started out as a professor at Aurora University, and I encountered a very, very stressful year. My mother-in-law was involved in a very tragic car accident. She was hit by a drunk driver. So that in terms of how that is all encompassing with your family and your home life and a lot of uncertainties surrounding that. And that was a toxic stress. The outcome had lasted for 5 years until she eventually did pass away. And I was in a very stressful year at work within my first full-time year at Aurora University. And so, just trying to get acclimated to being a professor. And I was in charge of our school social work specialization. And that was the year, if any of our listeners remember, that they changed the requirements for an internship. So our school social work students were set to begin their internship. And we find out 3 weeks before that most of them are ineligible. So was working through that within my first year at AU and dealing with obviously the stressors and grief surrounding my mother-in-law's accident. So Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who wrote The Deepest Well, a book I highly recommend, she talks about the bear that is present with you like at school, and then the bear that then comes home with you. And that was really what I was experiencing was a significant amount of stress and really didn't see kind of the end for that. And then got through that year, somehow magically got through that year. And I picked my practice back up. I picked my mindfulness practice back up. And then it became a complete game changer in terms of my stress levels. And then it did become like somewhat magical in terms of the way that I was dealing with the stressors. And then things got better at Aurora University in terms of administrative piece of my job at that time. And just, began to manage my stress better and really became involved in the academic side of studying mindfulness and mindfulness in schools. And then here we are. So it really helped to save and to help with level of self-preservation as well as within those relationships that I had both personally and professionally.
And that makes a lot of sense to me hearing that about you, Christy, because not only did you study it and research it and read about it, but you put it into practice in your own life with everything that was going on. And that's probably why some of the strategies that you've shared with us have been so powerful, because you have seen how it helped you and worked for you. And you are so passionate about sharing that with other people so that they can also use that. You had a long journey, interesting road to get to this place.
I think we all do. I think, everybody has a story and we all have this journey and path. And I was fortunate enough to have had some prior knowledge about this that I was able to turn back to when I was ready to begin practicing again. Yeah, so it was wonderful. And it has been essential, at least for my own mental wellness for this past year during the pandemic. Again, with some just with a major principle of mindfulness is moment to moment, non-judgmental awareness. And so, with all the uncertainties that exist just in regular life, of course, but also that's existed within the pandemic, staying present, staying focused on the moment, doing those frequent check-ins with how are we doing really helps to sustain mental wellness and within that window of tolerance. And the other cool thing that ended up a really cool secondary outcome that occurred throughout that whole process of that difficult year was I really learned how to move from being a type A personality to a type B personality. And I never thought that I had that. I always thought I thought you were sort of born into it and you were there forever, and not so much. So it's really neat to be able to be laid back. Like I never thought I would be able to describe myself in that way. But through those practices has really helped to appreciate the moment and to deal with stress and with, that anxiety and that perfectionism that we often hold, I think, as educators.
So there's hope for us all.
I was just going to say something for us all to work towards. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. That really gives us a good perspective on who you are and why you're here. And we're so happy that you're here today. And the Stress to Resilience series that you did for us, that you led us through a variety of different practices, some mindfulness exercises that I know we all appreciated. And that was what I was referring to. I actually continue to use one or two regularly. Do you mind leading our listeners through one now? And maybe some of them have been through the series and some of them haven't. But is there one that you could lead us through now? That would be really great.
Oh, I would love to. I will facilitate what I call the SAND practice. And I think that this will be a good one because it also helps us to remember what the major tenets of a practice looks like. And so using the acronym SAND, because in my mind, it kind of brings me to beachy, calm place of feeling connected. The acronym SAND, S stands for set your intention, and the A is attend. So attend to your intention or to your point of focus. N stands for non-judgment. So practicing not judging your thoughts or experiences throughout the practice. And then D stands for direct. So kindly and gently directing your attention back to your point of focus. Because as I had mentioned before, like with me being the worst meditator in the world, because the attention is constantly moving in other places. And that is actually a fine part of the practice, because that's what helps to strengthen it. So whenever that point is where we notice our attention goes off into another direction, there it is. I see you, and I'm going to bring it back to my point of focus. So that's the acronym, and I'll facilitate a brief practice if that's okay.
We are ready. That would be great.
Okay, wonderful. So if you'd like, find yourself in a comfortable position, whatever that means to you. And just begin to shift from doing to being fully present in your body and in your mind. Begin to notice the breath. And just begin to notice any thoughts that you might be having, anything that might be lingering from a few moments ago, or that might be planning what's going to be happening after this practice. And again, just acknowledging where you are. And if it's helpful, just bring some attention to the breath and just notice the pace, the rate, and the rhythm of the breath. Feel free to keep your breath as is. Or if you'd like to take some satisfying deep breaths with a long exhale, feel free to engage in that. Now consider setting an intention. And that intention could be just finding peace, or being fully present. It could be a mantra of sorts, of just repeating to yourself, I'm enough, or I've got this. Just begin to attend to your intention. Just keeping that in your mind. And just noticing how the body is reacting as you keep your mind set on that intention. And as you're practicing, just practicing non-judgment. So if you notice a thought coming along, if you notice a feeling or a sensation, just notice it. Name it to tame it, so to speak. And then kindly and gently direct your attention back to your point of focus or your intention. Anything that you are experiencing that feels good, just begin to amplify that sensation, just staying with it. Consider exploring any sensations that might be rising to the surface. This sense of curiosity, and with the lens of an observer. And again, just directing your attention back to that point of focus. You begin to notice your mind wandering. And practicing not judging anything that's arising within your consciousness. And when you are ready, and know what that means to be ready, just kindly and gently just begin to come back to the space that you're occupying. And just noticing if there's anything that you need right now. Just a little act of self-compassion right here. If it's a stretch or a drink of water, or just moving around a little bit. So noticing that need and then kindly responding to that need is a wonderful act of self-compassion. And then perhaps before coming back to our shared space together, hold on to that intention. or perhaps create another intention for the rest of the day or the rest of the week. Kind of set an internal reminder, maybe a place in your body where you feel as though will help to remind you. So it might be an emotion, or if it's a sensation of pain, that can help to remind you of that intention. Then coming back to our shared space together. And again, perhaps taking a stretch or a drink of water, whatever the body needs to be reactivated. And just again, noting any positive sensations that you're experiencing. And it's very helpful to continue to connect with those positive sensations, those moments where we feel connected to ourselves, because that makes it much easier to access later on and when we need it the most. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Christy. I think I want to take you and put you in my pocket and bring you home with me, because I was thinking, oh, this is just so peaceful and nice, even just to have those 5 minutes to just try to block things out and follow what you're saying in your nice, calm voice. And that was great. I love the practicing and not judging part. And I think that's a tricky one for me when you talked about that. And I thought, oh yeah, don't judge, don't judge, don't judge. That's a great one to remember. The second thing that I really found different in this when I've listened to your other practices was finding a place on your body. So whether that's something that might be painful or uncomfortable, or I found myself rubbing my knuckle on my thumb and I thought, oh, that could be my place. Like when I start to do that, is that what you mean, to kind of tie that moment into when you're doing that, to just trigger yourself to remember to be thankful or to show gratitude or to be present?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Our body is always talking to us, and it tends to repeat those things that we're ignoring or that need more attention. So if we can flip the script on that a little bit and use that as a reminder to practice sustainable self-care or self-compassion or gratitude or whatever it is that part of ourselves is asking for, then it becomes something that is more accessible as opposed to something that we're avoiding.
So, of course, I'm going to change up the tempo a little bit with some takeaways and rapid fire questions.
Oh, love it. Okay.
So we are going to go along with our takeaways, and then we want to hear from you, Christy, about what you want our listeners' big takeaway to be, and then we'll head into those rapid fire questions. So let's start with Dr. Amie Krummick.
Ooh, my big takeaway? I'm just so thankful for all of your advice and tips and strategies. One of the big takeaways that I had mentioned earlier was just practicing and not judging ourselves and not judging others is the big takeaway. And I think with that, I keep going back to that gratitude journal, both in the settings that we work in at work, the classrooms that we're in, as well as doing something like that at home, I think could be really helpful to support and bring that gratitude and mindfulness and in the moment to everybody. So that would be my big takeaways.
Mine are similar. I am going to focus on asking myself 2 questions. Where's the goodness coming from? And how am I going to find my moment of awe today?
Ooh, moment of awe today. Good one.
There you go. And then, Christy, what do you want our listeners to take away from today?
That this is accessible to us, that stress reduction and resilience we have it already. And we already have everything that we need is already within us. It is just a matter of accessing those parts of ourselves when we need it the most, as well as practicing. So we will have better accessibility to stress reduction and resilience when we need it the most. So it's very similar to Wizard of Oz and Dorothy, that she's always had that ability to return home. She just didn't know how to access it. Most of us already have that idea of, we already have some of that knowledge. We just need to refine it and to practice. So that would be probably in the most simplest terms of what I hope the listeners will take away today.
Thank you so much. All right, some rapid fire questions. Are you ready? Ready. What book are you currently reading?
So I read multiple books, kind of like TV programs at one time.
I cannot do that.
No.
I have books that I read in the morning, and then I have books that I read at night. So it differs a little bit. So what I actually just came back to this week, because it's the end of our semester at Aurora University, is this little book by Tori Press. She's known as Revelatory. She's very popular on Instagram. And she's this little book called I Am Definitely Probably Enough, I Think. And so I've been reading that every morning because that's much more of my contemplative time is my morning reads of how I want to set tone for my day. But the more serious reads is one that I just started reading this week by Dr. Judson Brewer called Unwinding Anxiety. It's a brand new book. I love his work. He specializes in addictions and cravings and habits. And so this book is really fantastic because it's not just to someone who has, when we think of addictions, we often thinking are alcohol and drugs, but it's really about kind of the craving mind and literally the title of Unwinding Anxiety. And he brings science in a very accessible way. And I'm also reading a book called Group by Christy Tate. And it's a wonderful read about a woman from actually the Chicagoland area. So I always love it when books are set locally because you really can get that mental image of what's happening. And when she starts group therapy with a psychiatrist. And so it's a very interesting book. And I just finished, which your listeners might be interested in, is a book called Connections Over Compliance by Lori Desautels. I'm not sure if I'm saying her last name correct or not. Fantastic book. And it really talks about how to co-regulate with students. And so there's a lot of mindfulness that's in there. And I think that book dropped in late fall. So a really great book.
So we have quite a few
There's a few to
titles to add to our lending library so that we can all read it. I love that. Christy, what is your best advice for an educator?
My best advice, maybe a little different than I don't know if it's my best advice, but it's a little different than anything I've talked about already. And that would be to set some compassionate and sustainable boundaries. So thinking about the practice of no thank you. So keeping in mind, when you say yes to something, you're also saying no to something else. And that no is usually sleep, having a meal you're actually tasting and digesting fully, your free time, time with family, time to watch Netflix. So making sure that you are setting those boundaries in a way that are sustainable and practicing saying no thank you when whatever the ask isn't necessarily going to be serving you well.
I love that one. I'm going to take that and put it in my pocket too.
There you go. Another thing to put in your pocket. We're adding to the lending library, to our pockets. We've got everything. How can our listeners find you? Do you have a website, social media?
Yes, I'm on all the socials. My website is KristenBrendel.com. And on Facebook and on Instagram, I'm at Dr. Kristen Brendel, with a DR.
We'll put that in the show notes for our listeners as well so that we can have people find you. Last question. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Ready. What is something that inspires, connects, or empowers you?
Forest bathing. So hiking, being in nature, honestly, that is where it is the most easy and accessible for me to feel connected, to feel inspired. It's kind of like when you take a shower, a literal shower, and you have all these amazing ideas and all the things that you should have said or that you would like to say, and you feel kind of engaged in the creative process. That happens anytime I'm out in nature. So, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a forest, but when we have a local prairie path, that's where I feel the most connected and inspired and frankly empowered as well.
I want to encourage our listeners to go do forest bathing and then take a picture of themselves wherever they are forest bathing and send it somewhere. I feel like it could be like this movement, right? Because how empowering would that be for all of us just to take that time for yourself and to go do that and then to reflect on what's going on and what's happening and be present and think about positive things.
Absolutely. Amie, let's do that.
I kind of want to do that.
Let's tag the post. What would be a hashtag for, would you have a hashtag for NSSEO?
Yeah. So if we can have our listeners use the hashtag Coach Me on social media, we can go ahead and compile a bunch of those. I think that would be amazing.
All right. I'm going to do it this weekend.
Okay.
Perfect. Yay. We will look forward to your picture. Thank you again, Christy. This was such an amazing opportunity to talk to you and get to really have a collaborative conversation with you. So thank you so much for your time today. And I hope our listeners enjoy it just as much as we did.
We did. Yes. Thank you, Christy, for your time. And thank you for letting us learn about you and all of your great practices that you wanted to share with us.
Thanks to both of you. And thanks to the listeners out there as well.
Hey, it's Amie again. That concludes our show. Join us next week for another episode of Coach Me If You Can.